Okay, the time has come to start looking at the rev trigger setup on the Centaur here. As you can see, I've done a little bit of glazed putty work, just filling in some of the slight irregularities in the shell and a few little doodads here and there. But just got these in, and this is actually a one of the rev triggers, the Bobololo style that Foam Blast sells. This one I've just taken a little time to sand down, put a quick polish on. You can tell a slight difference in texture and sheen, etc. Yeah, you can just has a slight more of a cast look to it. I'll clean it up and polish it a little bit more before it's installed, but now's the time to create a rev trigger. And here I'm going to start with the fitting of the actual where I want the button. Since the switch is going to be an aftermarket switch anyway, and we can put it wherever we darn well please, I'm more concerned with having a nice fit on the button itself. Now these buttons are designed to be close to a drop-in, and so it sticks out a little ways. I want to have a pretty short stroke on the trigger here, so it's more of just a instead of relying on the big lever on the microswitch, have it pushing directly on, and so I want to have just a short amount of travel to where this just barely sticks out, and then just kind of like a clickety clickety click instead of having like a chunk 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 type action on the button. So kind of sizing things up. Part of the reason I wanted to keep the Centurion grip all together is because it's got a lot of cool details, and I liked this kind of little finger bump thing, and I thought, well, wouldn't that be cool if we could kind of get this to line up along with, kind of like that, and maybe even trim just the very bottom of the rev trigger off to where it fits in nice and flush, to where, you know, it's like here, and then you just pull it back flush to rev it, so it's just a very small amount of travel. Unfortunately, I think we can use the bottoms of the trigger guide things here. There's a slight discrepancy one side to the other. This one has this bump up higher, this one lower. These ones are pretty much even. But I think if we go off of this one, and it relies mainly on that track, might even look at some kind of retainer thing to keep the switch from jumping out. We'll wait and see what we're dealing with when we get there. I have the original Strife trigger pieces around somewhere. I might be able to reuse some of those for the Centurion grip in order to maintain the little switch cover thing that kind of kept everybody all retained. So, I guess first order of business is to start cutting away some of the shell to be able to start sinking the switch in and really get a feel for how that's working. So, I think we'll just have at it with the Dremel and just do some roughing in real quick. Okay. Looks like, and we got this this screw port here, which is causing some grief just a little bit, but I think we might be able to work around it. But going off of Strife's Rapid Strike's other semi-automatic, or I guess flywheel blasters in general, the rev switch, basically the hole cutout comes in right underneath the bottom of the trigger guard, so I'm feeling good about the relationship there. Looks like we might be... That's a tough call. Since this is designed to fit through the stock hole, and then the little bottom tongue on the trigger stays outside, and I'm wanting to have it more of a flush fit, we might end up removing a little bit more below on the, opening up the hole longer on the Centurion grip, so that this lower portion is able to fit into the shell as well, and then we'll just add a little guide of some kind up here. It'd almost work with if we can work around that little screw port there to where this guy just kind of floats in there. Might add another tab up here to where it's basically holding it in that way, and that way we can have this guy kind of floating out in the open. So we need to, hang on a second, just to make sure we have this guy pretty... Yeah, that's pretty straight. So, okay. I think I'm going to go ahead and take this, take the hole down to the little extended bump thing here. I think all the way down, because that'll leave the little tongue thing underneath, kind of floating in the breeze. So that, I think we can work with that. I think I'll bring that down just a little bit more. Okay, that's looking okay, except... Okay, this is where we say, you know, Screwport, you're really screwing us up. So if we eliminate this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have kind of the area surrounded. It'd be nice if we could maintain that one just to help keep this area together. Let's see, how much do we need to remove to make that awesome? Almost half of that. Well, if it's Destiny's in question, we'll go ahead and trim off half of it and see how that makes us feel. And then if it works, cool, and if not, we'll just take it out the rest of the way and figure it out from there. I don't like removing screw ports if I can help it, but sometimes they get in the way of doing cool things. And honestly, there's times when I'd rather have cool things than have extra screw ports. So it's another one of those infinite list of compromises you end up making when you're doing integration work. Oh, hey, that's nice. Okay. Okay, just wanting to kind of go click and drop in. It's wanting to come in and then drop like that. So I think we may end up extending this surface here back just a little bit to where it basically comes back, maybe even all the way, or at least a good portion of the way, so you have a nice consistent track for this to ride on. And it looks like we're going to remove just a little bit more of that screw port. That's gave us a little more room. We just need to remember to remove half of the screw port area on the back side of that guy. So I'm going to drop in back there. Let's see, how's it looking on this side? On this side, it looks pretty cool. Click, click, click. Okay, I'm just eyeballing things. It looks like we might be able to just put a piece of this styrene, like I've been using elsewhere, on top of these little reinforcement deals, and it looks like it's going to be close to lining up with the rest of that front part there. So I'm just going to give kind of a quick, rough shape. We'll just tack that in place real quick. A little of that. Okay, decided to do something a little different. The styrene I was using is relatively thick stuff. I also have some stuff that's not quite so thin, or not quite so thick, and also some stuff that's mega thin. So I think we'll try something a little more appropriately thicknessed for that. Actually, that's pretty good, the mid-grade stuff. So that's pretty good. I think that's in range where we can work with it. Relatively pleased with that. Now just kind of duplicate the same hole on the other side, then we can sandwich it together and do some little fine tuning and see how we feel after that. Well, I think that's pretty good. A little more fine tuning, get the switch mounted and get a return spring on there, and I think that's going to be just perfect. It's there, but it's not too obtrusive or in the way. It's got a nice, have a nice little bit of action there. I think it'll complement the 3D printed trigger pretty well. So yeah, that's just a little fine tuner, and I think we're going to be in business. Okay, I've had a chance to work a little bit more on the rev trigger situation, and I ended up originally, well, okay, start over. Anyway, fitting the button, or the actual, yeah, I guess it's the button. I ended up adding a little bit more material, and it just, I mean, it was close, but it didn't really have quite the fit that I wanted. And so I took some of the epoxy sculpt as used in a previous video, and I wrapped some tape around the button itself, and then gushed some of the epoxy sculpt in there, and then wiggled that guy in where I liked it, made sure that it was oriented correctly, and then I took a little bit on the other half of the shell, and just, not a whole lot, just enough to kind of keep it located, and then fit the two shelves together, and let that cure, and I ended up with this nice little, kind of smoothed out little trough track thing, and that holds it pretty darn good. And then for the switch, I wanted to use an actual like mechanical fastener to hold it in place, which I've done in the past with the larger switches. But this little cherry is a kind of a tiny guy, and I couldn't find any screws offhand that were the right size. And so I figured if I couldn't find the right size screws, probably didn't have access to the right size of screw ports or repurposing screw ports. So I did the old-fashioned way of just gushing in some more of that epoxy sculpt around it, and got the switch in there where I liked it, or the button where I liked it, and because I wanted to have a pretty small amount of travel. And so what I have here, because there is a little bit of squish in the lever before it actually engages the actual switch itself, and so that gives me just enough room to squeeze this guy in to where he's solid, and I don't have to use like an external return spring, since this is kind of a custom application. So it holds it nice and tight, but there's still just a tiny bit of travel before it hits a switch, so it shouldn't be too much of a hair trigger. But it's just a nice little, I don't know how good that's shown up on the camera, but it is a noticeable amount of travel, but it's not a big giant stroke the way you see in stock setups and things like that. But it's kind of what I was hoping for. I wanted just enough like that. So I'm happy with that. I ended up using a little bit of some blaster scraps to fit in this little yellow piece here. There's one on the other side of the shell as well that I was hoping to use that as kind of the guide here, but I'm a lot happier with how it turned out. I think I definitely recommend doing that as well, and then filling in like the bottom part with the epoxy sculpt or epoxy putty or whatever, and that basically just keeps the button oriented side to side, so it's not very sloppy and everything. But I'm pretty happy with how that came out, and I have fit the two shell halves together and tested it, and I'm pretty happy with it. So now we can move on to cooler things now that we have the trigger set up.